grew up with Jurassic Park. I grew up with Are You Afraid of the Dark? I grew up with Hot Wheels leading the way. I grew up with Jerry Springer and Sally Jesse. Hey, I grew up with USA Up All Night. I grew up with pencils made by Yikes. I grew up with Jean-Claude, Steven, and Chuck D. Bates. I grew up with Hogs and Dial-Up 56K. I grew up with OJ evading arrest. I grew up with TGIF. I grew up with DJ, Michelle, and Steph. I grew up with TGIF. I grew up with Zach, Slater, and Screech. I grew up with Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous with Robin Leach. I grew up with Micro Machines and Gag. I grew up with Wild and Crazy Kids and all that. I grew up with MJ, Bo, and Dion. I grew up with Joe Bob Briggs, Monster Vision. I grew up with tricks were shaped like fruit. I grew up with Vortex, footballs, and Koosh. I grew up with Beavis and Butthead. I grew up with TGI. I grew up debating on the Jason versus Fred. I grew up with TGI. I grew up with Duke Nukem and Wolfenstein. I grew up with Pepsi cans that were white. I grew up with high tops, guts, and California dreams. Super soaker, slap bracelets, and Guess jeans. Fresh Prince, Martin Lawrence, Blossom, and Doogie. Hang Time, City Guys, and Life with Louie. SNES, Sega, and Nerf guns. Back to the Future and Free Movie Channel weekends. Oregon Trail, Trapper Keeper, Power Wheel trucks. Wrestling buddies, caller rides, and corn nuts. I grew up with Walkman and cassettes. I grew up with TGI. I grew up with Cineo and his guests. I grew up with TGI. I grew up with Tales from the Crypt, Scared to Death. I grew up with TGI. I grew up with One House Phone Cordless. I grew up with TGI. I grew up with TGIF. 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 So to speak, so to speak, so to speak.